guys.
Okay, thank you. So now it's the time to start. I would like to say thank you everyone to accept our invitation, short invitation, and I apologize to give you short time, but it's a quick, decide on my board to start this, to prepare this presentation. And before we start, and we would like to introduce each other, and I start my screen here, the corner one. Muhammad Ibrahim, welcome. You moved it.
Yep, sorry. Hi, everybody. My name is Mohammed Ibrahim, and I'm the Deputy Director with CARE Minnesota. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to share this moment with you all.
Thank you. Fatma Isa, next one.
Hello, everybody. My name is Fatima Isa. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Next, Yahya Ahmad.
He's babysitting, so don't worry about it.
No, thank you, Omar. My name is Yahya Ahmed. I am the student resiliency specialist at Mayo High School, and I'm also after school program coordinator at Jan Adams. Plus, I also help out. I work for RHCP, Rochester Healthy Community Partnership, and I'm here to learn.
Thank you. Rochelle.
So I'm Rochelle Schultz. I'm the Senior Companion New Program Coordinator in the area.
Thank you. Brian.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Brian Falloon, the 21st Century Grant Coordinator for Rochester Public Schools, colleague of Yahi who works for us in our program, and looking forward to hearing from everyone and learning more about Somali culture.
Thank you. Dr. Ford.
Hey, everybody. I know some of y'all I don't. I teach at the University of Minnesota, Rochester, although these days I'm bouncing back and forth between Madison, Wisconsin and Los Angeles.
Thank you. Adeline.
Hello, everyone. I'm Adelina Binney. I'm a program manager at the Center for Health Equity here in Rochester, and I'm just excited to learn a little bit more about Somali cultures. Thank you for the invite.
Kylie.
Good evening, everyone. I am a colleague of Adeline's from the Center for Health Equity at Mayo Clinic, and I work with Yai, Omar, and Ahmed with RHCP as well. And as usual, Omar, thanks for inviting me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Fathia.
Speaking with RHCP soon.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Can you repeat again, please?
Yes. Are you able to hear me?
I mean, we can barely hear you. I mean, you might have some audio issue.
I'm sorry. Can you guys hear me?
Now, yeah, you're good.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, but my name is Fatia Mohammed. I'm a recent graduate of Winona State, and I'll be starting soon with RHCP.
Thank you. Muhammad Adani.
Hello, everyone. My name is Muhammad Adani. I am a second-year PhD student here at Mayo Clinic, and thank you, Mr. Noor, for inviting me today.
Farah Adam.
Thank you so much, Omar, for inviting me. Okay, first of all, I want to say good morning for my time, and also good evening for your time. So my name is Farah Adam, a former academic admission advisor, early retired, now in Somalia. Thank you so much for your invitation, Omar.
Thank you, everyone. Now we are welcoming you, Mr. Muhammad Ibrahim, to start our presentation. Muhammad, welcome.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody. And I know there's a lot of elders in the room, so I feel like there's a lot of pressure on me to make sure that I get this right, so if please free to chime in at any given time to kind of chime in from your perspectives and so on and so forth. And I'm gonna go ahead and try to share my screen here if it allows me to.
Feel free, my boy.
No, thank you. You're having a.
Yeah, you can. I think multiple participants you can share. Yeah, so I click that one.
Oh yeah. Having some problems here.
Thank you.
I have to quit and come back. I think that's what it is. So I'll be right back.
Okay. But in the meantime, Mr. Fana, do you recognize my background? I mean, do you see that?
Yeah, I can see your background. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's Go Boeing. Go Boeing.
No.
Where is
Actually,
that?
that's actually Jazeera Beach.
Mogadishu?
Oh, Jazeera Beach. Ah,
Yep.
okay.
That's
kind of palm tree, huh? It's a palm tree.
You can go tomorrow for Asid. What do you say, this guy? Make sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe my
Make
plan is
sure
to go
that
on Friday. On Friday,
Farah can
inshallah.
go there and check.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, very good. We are doing good.
All right. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. It's clear, man.
Okay. Awesome, inshallah. So I want to thank the Somali American Social Service Association for putting this all together, and we really today want to talk about how can we best understand our students. I want to talk about a little bit about who are they, kind of where do they come from, a little bit of in terms of how are they categorized and the challenges that they do face, and then just a little bit about kind of like maybe what are the best ways to advise them, or maybe the best practices in terms of, from a community approach, how do we, equip students with all of the necessary tools to make sure that we are addressing not only gaps in achievement, but to really empower them to become, the individuals that they, choose to become. So it's really hard to kind of talk about people without really understanding their history, understanding their culture, and really, the great migration to Minnesota, the state that we know. So first, I want to kind of have a little bit of trivia, and from the elders, if you know what this is, please don't chime in. But for everybody else, could you take a guess to tell me, what this is right here? This is called a birjiko, and it could be pronounced in, in different, areas depending on the accent that is amongst the region. But could we take a guess, maybe in the chat, or just by a quick raise of hands, or just quickly unmute yourself and chime in and take a guess in terms of what do you think this is?
Well, I'm not going to say anything. I mean, since I'm one of the elderly here, and the material actually that's made of comes from the city where I was born.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah, it's clear. It's from El Bour.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah, now I can't without guessing.
So somebody said that it's for crushing grapes or berries. It's a really good guess. Are there any other guesses maybe?
I don't really have a guess, just thinking it's something you might be able to drink out of, just given that it has a small handle and it looks like there are small holes that maybe might filter something.
That's a good guess.
That's a good guess. I like that.
I'm not guessing anymore since you guys are all laughing and teasing.
Yeah, I'm thinking, judging by the laughter, it's got to be something really. Maybe it's for holding your beard shavings when you're shaving your beard.
That's a really good guess. That's a really good guess as well. It's actually a charcoal container that is used for cooking.
Oh, it is a cooking vessel.
Yep.
Cool.
So essentially, it's a cooking vessel at the bottom where you would, light charcoal, and then you would place a pot or other things above to cook. So let's do it real quick. What do you all think is right? This is called a what? What do you think?
Now that looks like something for carrying things. It looks like a A bag made of either animal skin, leather, maybe.
Oh, that's good.
It's made of animal skin. This one particularly, yes. And I've seen them using in the United States, especially if you go to the deep south.
Hmm. Is there something special that goes into it, or is it just a general purpose carrying thing?
Something important goes there.
Something vital. Let's put it that way.
Oh, vital.
Any guesses?
Is it maybe for carrying, I don't want to say babies, but
Water? Is it
Yeah,
for water?
you're absolutely right. You guessed it right.
Yeah, it is
oh, cool.
a water bucket that is made of animal skin.
Yes,
And then,
actually, yes. You used it to get the water from the well.
yep.
Yes, of course.
And if you see kind of the string that's in there a little bit, that is the string that's used to lower the water bucket.
Yeah.
Wow.
Should have guessed from Wadan. Yes, Wadan means water. Is that right?
No.
No. No.
No. Okay. Different language.
Good guess. What about
Aye.
here? This is the pod. What do you think this is? Could potentially be used for?
Maybe similar to the last one's cooking vessels, or
Yep, similar material is made from the first picture that we've seen.
Incense?
Great guess.
Yes, it's to burn the incense.
Oh,
yeah.
cool.
Great guess. Great guess. Great guess. Yeah.
Ahmed, can you describe the material for the first and third item, just because you said it's specific to?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is it's a material that's only found in a town in central Somalia, actually, and it's a very rare material. I mean, it's like a clay, but it's not clay. I mean, I forgot what they call it. I mean, the name in English.
It's white clay. I'm not sure. But.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like white clay. That's what they call it, and you can make it a lot of useful things, special household items that you can do it.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Ahmed, do you know if they mold it or do they carve it? How do they do it?
No, they carve it.
Yeah, this is now I have my store now. We can sell it in my store and downtown.
Yeah, they carve it, and actually there are entire mines where you can get this one. And I think maybe 10,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago, this used to be a volcanic area. So then that's how this material, I mean, it came up, and people were so creative to figure out what's the best way to use, this.
So, so just in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and just kind of breeze through some of these things. So kohl is actually a really large, really, big beads, prayer beads, usually used to supplicate for those who are praying or after prayer. And then one of the items here as well is a ma'wis. And this is really a material that is, really worn around the hip, by men, traditionally worn. And if you go to Somalia right now, you would see this worn by almost everybody. So this is a very traditional clothing that men usually wear. It's longer than a kilt, but some people would attribute it to a kilt, but it's much, much longer. And it really goes from, the belly button all the way down to the ankles as well.
Man is a skirt.
Yep, very similar, yep. And then also, I'm not gonna play this video just because of the interest of time, but essentially this kind of shows you the process of the Frankensteins, or the incense that it actually grows in a lot of arid regions in Somalia. And you can kind of see them kind of growing out of trees, and they would go in and they would harvest the incense here a little bit as well. And you can kind of see them using a chisel-like item.
Yes,
as well,
we are
to
always
kind of carve
afraid.
this. And
Every
this is
year,
the
when they
material
are
that is found really across the world, and specifically in the region of Somalia. This is where it's mostly found and really gets exported out. So just to kind of talk about the Somali people's history, culture, and the Great Migration to Minnesota. it's really difficult to not address these things without talking about the depiction of Somalis in media, as well as the conditions that were created by having really a Cold War that occurred in Somalia that really made a lot of people fled to countries like the United States to really seeking asylum. And really, you do have movies that got dramatized out of the conditions that came out of of Minnesota due to either the Cold War or after kind of like the aftermath in terms of how people are surviving really, and the depiction of these pirates or whatever the case is, and it's really just fishermen protecting their water from international boats coming and spilling them and so on and so forth. So we'll kind of come back to this media conversation and this depiction, but I just wanted to kind of bring this up front as we kind of talk about themes like Islamophobia and so on and so forth through media and and other things as well. So Somalia does really have a really rich history, and these caves are really found on the rural outskirts of Hargeisa, Somali land, and that's situated in kind of the Morodi Jah region of the country. Oops. And really they contain some of the earliest known cave carvings or cave paintings of domesticated Africans, and this was really found in early 9000 BC. So you can kind of tell that this region was inhibited by folks as early as some folks can remember. And it's really important to kind of talk about the geographical advantages of where Somalia is located. So as you can kind of see, it is the Horn of Africa, and can I actually get a little pointer maybe? If it allows me to, but it's okay. But if you look at kind of the Horn of Africa, you can kind of see the travel or the trade routes from an international perspective in how vital Somalia was actually in some of its port cities, and it really controlled a ton of international trade, and that really allowed not only to have certain things coming to Somalia, but it really allowed for folks to kind of expand, whether it's trade or whether it's knowledge that is exchanged amongst the Somalis in the region that really shaped the culture. And that's why you really have a lot of Somali people that may speak multiple languages, because of the way that the country is positioned. You would have a lot of routes and a lot of visitation of other individuals coming from, like I said, across the world. And from that, you can kind of see proponents of how cross-cultural implications actually come out in Somali culture. For example, we talked about the Maoris a little bit earlier. If you actually go to Indonesia or Malaysia or those countries, you would actually find Asian men wearing the exact same, not to probably not patterns, but really the same Maoris, the long rounded garment that you see that will go from the belly button all the way down to the ankles. And also, if you actually go to China and certain parts of Eastern Asia, those regions are not known to have giraffes, and really they took giraffes from Somalia all the way out and exported them out to Eastern Asia. And they actually even use the same word as giraffe in Chinese that is used in Somali. So you can kind of see a lot of these historical implications that do come out in history, and a lot of Somali influence across the world and worldly influence into Somali culture as well. And you definitely see that within the way that we dress culturally. You do have like the sari or the bati in Somali, where it's kind of like this silky garment that a lot of Somali women wear, but is the same in a lot of Southern Asian cultures. And then Somali food. If you haven't had Somali food, I urge you to try Somali food. And the reason why Somali food is really unique is because the uses of herbs and spices that come that come with Somali dishes are a proponent and a beneficiary of international trade that has occurred far and wide. So you really have a lot of Asian spices and other things and cooking material that really came into Somali food, as well as how Somali food might have also influenced other areas across the globe. So there's really a lot of influence if you see from Far East, because that was kind of the dominant or the prominent trading partners that would come and try to trade with other countries in Mogadishu or other port cities in Somalia. And we did talk about the Somali food. As you can kind of see the colors, you see the uses of fruits, you see the bees, and having certain things like putting potatoes in rice is something that might not be common in a lot of cultures, but it's really common in the Somali culture.
The Somalian cuisine has various influences from countries like Italy, Turkey, India, Arabia, and Ethiopia. It is enriched with Somali's regional dishes, a fine example of local people's culinary expertise, and they include breakfast, lunch, dinner, plus snack. Breakfast qura is an important meal for Somalis who often start the day with some type of tea, shah, or coffee, qahwa. During this time, people take various confectionaries with tea. These include anjero, sawayad, malawah, and many more. Anjero is a staple food among the Somalis, usually served as breakfast food. It is a fermented pan bread with a soft texture and can be eaten with ber, liver, broken into pieces with ghee, subag, mixed with tea and masara, sesame oil, or otka, which consists of small dried pieces of camel meat to balance the taste. Sawayat, a flat bread preparation popularly recognized as kimit. It is prepared either in a round or square shapes. Malawah, a traditional pancake resembling Indian paratha in shape, is considered as a staple food in Somalia. Lunch, qada, is often an elaborated main dish of pasta, basto, or rice, beris. Spiced with the rice, it is often served with a banana. Baris kukaris, I would say, is a very similar to a rice dish called pilau. It is seasoned with the fragrant spices and cooked in meat broth, and generally speaking, tomatoes are added to the dish, making for a superbly tasty meal. Marak digag. This is a chicken soup flavored with vegetables and spices. The tickling flavors of coriander and ginger acts as a taste enhancer of this appetizer. Try this with bread and get mesmerized like a foodie. Spaghetti can also be served with rice, forming an overtly dish referred to as federation. This dish is usually served with equal or whole portions of rice and spaghetti, split on either sides of a large oval plate. Popular drinks at lunch are raqay, tamarid, ambe, mango, zaytun, guava, and lassi. Dinner asha in Somalia is served as late as 9 p.m. The dishes the Somalis take for dinner are ambolo iyo maraq, rice and adzuki beans in a wonderful combination. Any sort of lentils or beans can be identical replacement for adzuki beans. Kalun iyo baris, a fish sauce with an amalgamation of rice and spices. Highly delicious. Apart from the fish, you will get a unique tasty of eggplant, carrot, and tomatoes. Sugo sukar, pasta cooked with beef and hawash, Somali spices. Enjoy the taste of pasta like never before with tomatoes, beef cubes, green and black pepper. Before sleeping, a glass of milk spiced with cardamom is often consumed. Snacks, sambusa. Sambusa is a triangular fried pasty dish often filled with spicy minced meat or vegetables. It is very similar to the Indian samosa. Halwa or halwa is a festive sweet treat reserved for special occasions. With the main ingredients including sugar, butter, and oil, this may be a treat you'll only want to indulge into once in a while. Somali chai tea. There are different varieties of Somali tea. Tea has several other names: Asmali, Strungi, Alen, Wariko, Warenta, and Bigais. Nafako. These are stuffed fried potatoes. According to the local language, nafako implies nutrition. The stuffing is done with the eggs, but sometimes the locals replace the potato with beef for a fresh variation. Kaka, fried bread chunks frequented during religious ceremonies like Eid and Ramadan. This deep fried item is something you will lose your heart over. You're sure to relish the crunchiness at the first bite.
Awesome. So that made me really hungry. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. So, but ultimately, it's also when looking at Somalia from a geographical perspective, we really have some of the longest coasts, if not the longest coast in Africa, which results with really long, beautiful coastlines, beautiful beaches, and this is kind of what a lot of the waters is really deep blue waters and so on and so forth. So it makes the region look really, really beautiful. And some of the geography, you can kind of see some mountainous areas, really arid, dry, but at the same time, you do have, big lakes. And oftentimes there are areas that are really, really, really close to the waters and beautiful greens, deep greens, and a lot of really great farmland. And you do have a lot of fertile land across the regions in Somalia. And then some of the animals you have camels, you have turtles, and you do have really, kind of a lot of creatures that you wouldn't see otherwise, sometimes in the rest of Africa. And because of the farmland, like I mentioned earlier, you do have a lot of nomadic like lives where the folks would actually use camels to kind of, to travel from point A to point B. And a lot of people are actually herders that would, really live off of the land or try to make a living, off of the land as well. So it's really important for us to kind of talk about the colonization of Somalia, and then to kind of talk about the events that occurred right after. So I'm going to play this short video as we kind of start talking about, kind of like the implications and how that affected a lot of Somalis as well.
With the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869, Somalia's strategic location became even more significant. Being at the intersection of Africa and Asia did not go unnoticed in the West. In 1884, the United States and 13 European countries met in Berlin, their aim to divide the African continent between them. They divided what we know as Somalia into 3 provinces, each ruled by a different European country. Italian Somalia and French Somalia. The mainly Somali region of Ogaden was taken by the Ethiopian Empire and the NFT by Kenya.
The incredible thing about Somalia is that if you go way back in its history, it's always been either fought over or had foreign powers intervening in some way.
Both British
and because of the location of Somalia that we talked about, that allowed Somalis to really enjoy a lot of great things from international trade. And it was really an advantageous point where you did have a lot of, colonization that did occur that really split kind of the company, or the country in 3 different parts, where you have British Somalia in the north, Italian Somalia in the south, and then the French Somalia that was a part of the northwest portion of Somalia, as well as a portion of the Ogaden region that was then taken over by Ethiopia, as mentioned. So we'll go ahead and kind of skip through this. But if you look at this, this is a picture of Somalia in 1960. Really beautiful, and you can kind of see a lot of influence by the architecture and a lot of influence in terms of like how big the roads are, so on and so forth. And especially, it was really a hub for tourism. And I remember when I was younger, I looked at an article from the New York Times that was archived at the university that I went to. And the New York Times was naming off the top 3 most visited places across the world. And number 1 was Paris, number 2 was Venice, and Mogadishu was actually number 3. So it was a really coveted, really well visited place just for relaxation. A lot of people had timeshares there. And Somalis that were living in the area as well benefited from a lot of tourism business that were brought forth by a lot of the foreigners. And then you see there was a clan-based civil war that occurred in the 1990s, and there are still remnants of that civil war occurring. And the U.S. went there on a peacekeeping mission, as they say, where we did have the battle in Mogadishu, or Black Hawk Down, where you see a lot of the dramatization come out in a lot of the films. And you do kind of seeing a lot of, displacement of a lot of families. And because of this really cold war that was occurring in Somalia, that really made my family and a lot of other families really reconsider in terms of living there. And they went out seeking asylum in other countries. And that kind of led to the great migration that occurred here in Minnesota. And that's why we see a lot of, Somalis coming to Minnesota and other countries in the 90s, a little bit before the 90s, and so on and so forth. And you see there's a lot of migration that happened. There's US-based refugee camps in Ethiopia, Kenya, Djibouti, where resettlement was occurring into the developed world. And there's a lot of camps a lot of people have family members still in those camps, really waiting for asylum status to be kind of resettled into more developed countries across the world. And why did people pick Minnesota? Minnesota is a phenomenal state. We have the best weather in the world. No, I'm just kidding. It's 90s. In the 90s provided a lot of good welfare and low-skilled opportunities. And a lot of people were really, attracted to the nomadic culture of Minnesotans. And if you look at kind of how Somalis kind of settled into the United States, as kind of like large migrations were still occurring between 2008 and 2012. A lot of people were settling in Washington, D.C. You have San Diego, some people in Phoenix, some in Tallahassee. But if you look at, Minneapolis or the St. Paul area in Minnesota, you have Ohio. That's kind of where predominantly a lot of Somalis migrated to. And they do have some all the way up in the Maine area, the Boston area, some parts of New York. But the earliest settlers that were coming into the United States before, the Civil War, a lot of people were coming to go study university. So a lot of folks were going to, the Virginia area to study, or the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, as well as New York. And some people actually went out to study in Colorado. So those were some of the earliest accounts that we can find of people actually coming here and studying. But when it comes to actually seeking asylum or coming here by a diversity visa or the lottery visa that was abolished by the last administration, these towns or these cities were really kind of the focal point of where folks were happening when it comes to refugee resettlement. And right now, I think the biggest place in Minnesota that a lot of resettlement is being seen is in the St. Cloud area as well. And you can kind of see it, the Somali arrival in Minnesota, and kind of like the trend that's occurring from, the 1990s, so on and so forth, all the way up. And you can kind of see that there was this really big peak that occurred in kind of the 2008, 2009 years in the state of Minnesota. So if you just kind of talk about the Somali language when it comes to the alphabet, Somali was actually a really oral language and was not adopted into or written down until the 1972. And that's where you kind of see some spelling confusion. So for example, like names like Hali in Somali would be spelled with an X, but in English or using the characters that we use here in America, you would see the H produces the H sound, right? But in Somali, X really produces that sound as well as Mahmoud would be spelled with an X, or Muhammad would be spelled with an X. But in here, you'd see it spelled with an H, as well as Ali, and the C pronounces this is pronounced with a, but we don't have that. We don't have a letter attributed to that here. So typically you'd see Ali being spelled with an A instead of a CALI portion as well. So that's what he said, so the letter H in English in Somali is really the letter X. The letter A in English is really the letter C in Somali as well. So, and then if you talk about kind of like how the names are kind of set up, not to skip over that, really for us, so there's this idea of surnames or family names. Really in the Somali culture, is really, we have the first name. In some people, their last name could really be their father's name, or it could be their grandfather's name, depending on their choice. But we don't really go by surnames. So we don't really have like the Johnsons or anything of that sort. Typically, that's attributed to clans or large families and so on and so forth. That would, be from this clan or from this family and so on and so forth. But the individuals themselves, they would be named by, their name, their father's name, and then the grandpa's name. Kind of in that order, or they would just attribute their last name to being their father's name, depending on the Somali that you would ask living, here as well. And then because Somali has this really deep oral tradition, this is why we talk a lot. We're very exuberant. We have exclamation points or question marks on our face all the time. And that is really attributed to kind of how we lived. And also this is why Somali is also known as the nation of poets, where we have a ton of Somali poets, really, really famous Somali poets as well. So if you just kind of talk about the average Minnesotans by age here in Minnesota, you do see this large number there at the bottom when it comes to kids, below the age of 10, right? And actually in 2018, the most recent numbers, about 40% of Minnesotans that are Somali are below the age of 9. So this number is really exploding, and really just because, Somali people, we have a lot of kids. It is kind of the tradition, it's in our culture to have a lot of kids, and it's seen as a blessing as well. So it is not by a surprise where you would have this large influx. So this is why it's really important for us to kind of start having these conversations about how do we better educate, and how do we best stand next to our children when it comes to shrinking the education disparities that face a lot of our kids here today. And if just by looking at some numbers here by age distribution, you really see how young the Somalis are when it comes to age distribution within our community. And the median age among Minnesotans, amongst cultural groups, you look at Somali kids really being amongst the youngest the same way Hmong kids are. So the average age in the Hmong community, in the Somali community, is about 22. And this is data that's coming out of the state of Minnesota as well. And then if you talk about birthplace, 59% of Somalis were born out of the country as well. So you can kind of see that here on the right, on the left-hand side. And then if you look at the bottom, only about 34% of Somalis are born in Minnesota, and then 7% or so are born in another U.S. territory or another U.S. state as well. But if you look at the number, it's really Liberians and Somali people that have the strong number, as well as Filipino, Chinese, and Asian Americans as well, of them being foreign born. So if you look at people that are living poverty or near the poverty line, Ethiopian as well as Somali folks are really living in the poverty line or near the poverty line. And for me personally, I feel like, GDP is really used to look at this number, and this doesn't really talk about people that have to take care of the elderly or the grandparents and they cannot work because they have a disabled child or a child that's facing some type of challenge. So I think these numbers, even though they look really, really bad, in actuality, it's actually a lot worse. And this is on a grand scheme of when you're looking at everybody in general. But typically, when you're looking at disparities, it's really the communities of color that suffer the most. And you can kind of look at here in terms of just looking at how people are living near or in the poverty lines. And then if you look at the median annual earning, you really look at Somalis being around 29,000, rather than if you're looking at like American or Asian Indians, excuse me, they're at about 78,000 or so. And Somalis in Minnesota really have the lowest medium annual earning amongst a lot of other ethnic groups in the state of Minnesota. And this number is really used, tracking for kids that are around the age of 16 all the way up to 64. So really the working age in Minnesota. And we're talking about the three different generations in the Somali community. You kind of have like the first wave generation. These are the kids that were brought here between the ages of 12 and 18. Their English skills are very poor. They speak Somali very well, but they were evaluated according to their age and really not to their education, because Somali kids, when they're hit 12 or 13 or 14, they have a certain level of expectation that 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds don't really have here. They're a lot more responsible. They're a lot more and they get treated with as adults as an early age. So they have this ability to take on a heavier burden. So when it came to the 12 to 18-year-olds in the first wave of kids that came here, a lot of their families were living in the poverty line and they're trying to survive. So they had to make a tough decision in terms of, do I pursue education or do I help support my family? And a lot of them actually chose that the financial burden was greater, and they chose that over education, and they wanted to go pursue work rather than them pursuing education. So then you see a lot of them entering kind of like the workforce and working blue collar jobs and so on and so forth. And especially in a system that kind of doesn't reward 12 and 13, or excuse me, 16, 17-year-olds for working, because their paychecks were then really affecting the benefits that their families were receiving, and so on and so forth. Then you do have, the mixed generation, which is kids that were, between the ages of 9 and 5. They speak English really, really well now, but their Somali is kind of so-so. That's like myself, and a lot of those kids actually chose education. And when it comes to that, they do really well in education, but at the same time, it's a lot of the girls or a lot of the women that are outperforming a lot of the boys or the men in education and so on and so forth. And because they were young and so on and so forth, a lot of them have a burden of contributing to their families overseas and so on and so forth. But a lot of them are kind of had the best opportunity to really adapt while not really fully giving up their culture, right? So they really, assimilated the most out of everybody, and where they're able to really have some time to learn from their older siblings, and then they really figured out how to code switch, because they have to wear one hat when they're at home, but when they go to school or whatever the case is, they have to put on another hat. So that's a challenge that those group of kids faced. And then now you have the Gen Zers, the TikTok generation, or as some people call them, the pizza generation, where their English is phenomenal, but they're really losing their mother tongue, and those kids really face a challenge, because there might be a huge language gap, because even though the kids might not be able to have the best language skills in their mother tongue to be able to communicate with their parents, and vice versa. So you do kind of have a huge kind of communication gap sometimes amongst them, where you would kind of have a lot of difficulty with parents, especially if they don't have siblings that are a little bit older to advise these kids in terms of like what to do next and how to do well for themselves. So that is kind of the three generations that kind of exist. And educational gaps are really our collective problem, right? If you look at just high school graduation rate gaps, they have declined, but they still remain wide. So if you look at numbers from 2002 to 2012, it's getting better. But if you look at, for example, like American Indians, the education gap for them, it's really dropping. But if you look at education gaps amongst white people in the state of Minnesota, it's kind of really staying going up slowly, but we're kind of having some still some challenges. Even though it's an upward trend, it's still, the disparity is still huge, and there's a lot of work that we can still do. And then if you look at just college readiness by race, you do have white kids that are kind of doing well. There was a little bit of a dip where everybody kind of dipped and they kind of leveled off, but really there isn't really much progress that's being made if you look at 2014 to 2018 as well, when it comes to kind of, are we really doing great work to bridge the gap? And even though we're trying a lot, the gap is still staying to be about the same. And the interesting fact is that we worked with a group of kids in St. Cloud, and if you look at just Muslims, what they do is we memorize the Quran, which is the holy book that we have. And we actually have a lot of kids that are based in Minnesota that are winning international competitions, right? And it's not like one person or two people. We are like killing it at the international level. And yet these are the same kids that for some odd reason, they can perform really well when it comes to memorizing, and I'm doing well in terms of their religious studies. But when it comes to their education studies themselves, they're getting D averages and C averages, which doesn't really make sense. And this is why this is a challenge that we're facing, is that the kids, they have the ability to perform well, but maybe we're not equipping them with the right tools to allow them to continue to do well, and tools that we could ultimately use to bridge the education gap that we are kind of seeing. And if you look at just the education gap amongst Somalis in general in Minnesota, you do have Somalis at a 34% gap. And this was done by the Minnesota State Demographic Center 2016. But the education gap across all Minnesotans is 6%, but amongst Somalis is 34%. So as you can kind of see, the gap is glaring, and there's a lot of work that we can do. But recommendations to just strengthen the Somali student achievement is we need to have culturally responsive and culturally relevant curriculum, practices, and also the environment must really embody the student's experience to allow the students to feel powerful in owning their education. And I think that's really, really key. We need to also have multiple literacy approaches, and we need to initiate literacy and native language development at any age to establish this linguistic foundation for English learning and strengthening their own identities. And then also, and this is something that we really strive for, is we need to have teachers and parents working together, because families, it's in their interest to have their kids do well in school, and teachers want their kids to do well at school. But I think we need to develop stronger teams with families. And we tried a pilot program where we worked with the religious teachers, religious study teachers in St. Cloud, and we partnered them up with school districts, because if kids are performing well, we need to maybe have them, we need to place a higher expectation on them to perform well. And at the same time, there's this cultural element as well, where the kids have somebody that knows them well, they know who they are, they know their parents. So it kind of helps them from not getting in trouble and maybe paying attention more. But at the same time, the kids that were in St. Cloud that were getting the C and D averages, and now we're at a B plus average across. And one thing that's also important that a lot of people talks about, they talk about diversifying the teaching workforce. Students will be more engaged when they see a teacher that looks like them, that understands them, that understands their experiences, so on and so forth. But it's also important for us to make sure that we are doing everything that we can to retain diverse teachers, right? Because it's cool to have a diverse teacher, but if we can't keep a diverse teacher within 6 months to a year, then it's really useless, because we need to also develop working environments for diverse teachers to want to be a part of, to feel like they are doing the work that they need to be, to feel respected, and so on and so forth. So that is some of the recommendations that we have to strengthen the Somali student achievement. And then also you do see this growing a phenomena of charter school versus public school, because of really the lack of cultural sensitive programming that's happening. And that's why you're seeing a huge spike in terms of Somali students that are graduating from prep schools or charter schools, and so on and so forth. And then Somalis, we do have this co-parenting culture where both parents would parent, but at the same time, we do have a communal parenting structure as well, where the community would interact, and you would respect your elders, and because of that, there is the sense of the whole village does really raise the child. But at the same time, these practices are practices that could be brought forth into the schools as well. And this is a short clip of a student teaching other students, and this kind of shows this idea of we need to engage high achieving kids in different ways that are possible. So I'll go ahead and play this short clip here for you as well.
waxaa madax u ahaa maxamed cabdulle xasan sayid maxamed cabdulle xasan wuxuu ahaa ninkii ugu horeeyay ee gaalada la dagaalamayay naftiis uhuru ahaa oo inuu Soomaali xornimo u socdo ayuu doonay ujeedadiisu waxay ahayd gobonimada.
And then there's also this rich educational culture or academic culture in Somalia, and those kids in those clips, they're really answering tough historical questions about about some of the history of Somalia and so on and so forth. So education is really rich and is really, really important and truly a part of Somali culture. But we need to do everything that we can to empower our Somali kids. And speaking about that as well, there's also this challenge of Islamophobia that exists in society today as well. And this is irrational fear and hatred towards Islam or Muslims that is being perpetuated by these negative stereotypes that result in bias, discrimination, and oftentimes marginalization of Muslims, right, from social and civic life. And it also attributes to these kids as well in school. And I'm not going to play this clip because it's traumatizing, and it could be traumatizing for some people, but you see two young white boys fighting with two young Somali boys as everybody's trying to pull them away. And that really started off with one of the boys trying to joke and really pulled the young girl's hijab, choking her, and wouldn't really get off because he thought it was funny, and he was basically telling her to take it off, right? And kids get attacked like that as well. And for us here in Minnesota, we do have a case right now where a Muslim kid's mom decided to become more visibly Muslim and wear the hijab, and he was bullied for so long that the school wouldn't really do anything about it and wouldn't address it. And the kid ended up taking his own life, right? And this happened in the Chicago School Lake District. And we are a part of a federal lawsuit involving with that. So we really need to not only empower our kids, but make sure that kids have a space in school where they can feel like they are welcomed and that they can become and learn in an environment where they don't have to continually watch their back or continue being in a position to defend themselves. And then also we do have a lot of mental health challenges for Somali refugees as well. And we have to talk about the traumatic experiences that a lot of families experience, especially when they're running from a war-torn country, trying to do the best for their, their children. So there's trauma is prevalent, traumatic memories are prevalent, insomnia, anxiety, PTSD, headaches, and stomach aches, and so on and so forth. A lot of educators and a lot of researchers are starting to say that trauma exists in the bones, right? So when we're dealing with our kids, we have to approach them and really listen to them and hear them out as well, because they may be lashing out because of a mental health issue or because of something that they're experiencing that they don't know how to express quite yet. So it's important for us to be kind of patient and approach our kids from a mental wellness perspective as well. And the biggest part about that is to kind of explaining the process. I think a lot of us just kind of assume if a kid is, is having a problem or something like that going on in school, or they want to challenge something that's going on at school, they may not understand the process. So explaining the process and breaking it down, that allows for a lot of our kids and a lot of our students to have some ownership into the process, and that allows them to come up with creative resources or creative solutions to the problems that is facing them as well. And we do have a really very small conception of mental health issues. And for us culturally, it's, somebody's either sane or they're insane, and educating the parents sometimes is also kind of, challenging. So a kid may be more expressive to their teacher about the challenges that they're facing, but they may be a little bit shy to express that with their parents as well. So if you do come up with a student that is facing those challenges and so on and so forth, I would encourage to having culturally competent or using culturally competent resources to kind of help bridge that cultural gap that the student may be experiencing, as well as how does the child or the student present these conversations to their parents at home to say, hey mom, I do struggle with depression and it is affecting my schoolwork, or so on and so forth, and kind of bridging the gap for these kids to have these conversations as well. And there are other medicine men or Quranic healing that is used to treat mental illness. So there might be a strong hesitancy from parents that kind of approach these conversations from a Western medicine perspective, but I think it's really important to kind of have these conversations and kind of help driving some of that as well, because the child that's lashing out at school really may be still competent, but maybe is dealing with some type of mental, health, or is suffering from some type of mental health issue as well. And I think we need to approach things from also that lens as well. And then also it's good to explain kind of like some cultural gaps. And I know we're kind of running out of time, but one finger calling to somebody versus using the whole hand could be deemed to be really, really disrespectful. So I would avoid, using a single finger to call somebody. That is really demeaning in Somali culture. In Somali culture, if you really respect somebody and you value what they're saying, you look down, you avoid eye contact. And religiously, we are ordered as men to also lower our gaze in women as well. So it is a sign of respect and honor for Somalis to not give anybody eye contact directly. But in the culture here, it's if you're not giving somebody eye contact, right, you're not paying attention, you're dozing off, so on and so forth. So you do kind of have those issues as well. And then when can you hug a Somali? A lot of people would not, offer you to hug. And in these scenarios, religiously, it's not permissible. So I would kind of leave it up to the person's discretion as well. And as an individual, I would advise for you not to lead in those matters and let the other individual lead, but understanding that in the back of in the mind is that religiously for an individual to hug the opposite sex is not permissible in Muslim and also in Islam. And also personal space is a huge thing. Somalis don't really have this concept of personal space as well, but when it comes to handshakes and hugs and so on and so forth, just let the other individual lead. If they want to shake your hand, they can make that decision. Do not make that decision, for them. And then also, again, Somalis predominantly strongly Muslim, and understanding Islam and kind of what's permissible in Islam is really a strong key and a strong indicator to understanding Somali culture as well. And then also, if you're going to ever visit the home or so on and so forth, please take off your shoes. Some people may be you might feel extremely offended if you wear your shoes inside the home, as well as you're going to be probably offered some icebreakers, and some tea and some food and so on and so forth. And I think that's kind of the ending of the presentation. And we could talk about cultural gaps and so on and so forth, but I know that we're running out of time. I want to be really respectful for anybody that may have some questions or or suggestions or anything else that a lot of the respected elders that are in the room would like to add. And one question that did come in is how oftentimes do mental health, how do Somali families handle mental health issues? And then is that when the elders become involved? I think this is predominantly a new issue. For example, there's a lot of autism that is predominant in the Somali culture, and we're still at the early phases of even coming up a word for that, right? So I think it's really good to usually allow the families to lead, but at the same time allow the families to kind of understand what mental health issue maybe their student is going through, or so on and so forth, and and allow them to kind of pick and choose kind of like the direction that they want to take. But I think it's important to actually have that conversation and approaching it from a perspective of, what, we want your child to do well, we want your student to do well, and these could be the things that are hindering from a mental health perspective the student from achieving what they need to achieve, right? So I think it's it's really, really sensitive conversation, but at the same time, I think it's sometimes we have to have those conversations, and the elders sometimes could get involved depending if it's a school issue, but a lot of Somalis could be really, really private, and and they may not share that, or they may not want you to share that with elders. So I would always say, let the family ask them if they want to get involved as well.
A great job, Ibrahim. I'm going to add a little bit, and thank you very much. You covered a lot today. And I work at Rochester STEM, and I teach ESL teaching. And one thing Ibrahim covered was that kids are doing very well in Quran or religious classes, not doing their average in schools, and that could be contribution both parents, how they put effort and how they communicate with the teacher, because most of Somali parents, they have an English barrier, language barrier, and they cannot send the email to the teachers, or if they make a phone call, even they can't understand the parents. And if the schools are not offering those services for parents, it's going to be it's too late to know your child is failing or missing work. I work in this, especially COVID-19 pandemic, it was very hectic. Even myself speaking Somali language and teaching kids who are Somali and English, both parents are, it was hard. And I was daily communicating with them, making phone calls, even if they are missing in the class. I would say, your child is not here. And some teachers, they don't have that time, and they don't even communicate to the parents and say, your child is not here. It's hard for them, or they don't even have that relationship. So relationship is very important. Parent and child and the teacher is the very one thing really I advise those who are working with students, and even ask your child, did your parents have emails? Can I send them emails? And I have been using Schoology, and Schoology has a feature where you can put the teacher's emails and phone numbers, and if your students are missing work, you can send a message. And that was a great, those who only knows how to use email, but those who does not know technology, it was very hard to reach them or call them, or most of them, both parents are working because they want to put the food on the table, and that's the first priority. And I teach a class called personal learning, and one thing I teach my students is really they need to prioritize what is the short term goals and long-term goals. And if you ask them, our students, they don't know because they don't have that knowledge, and they don't have a parents who are doing a planning with them, who are communicating with them what's important for them, what is they need and what they wanted. And if we don't have that, it's really hard. And if the schools are not offering those services, it's going to be added up, and we're going to have, that's why we have a small number of students are graduating high school or graduating with the acceptable grade that will accept their college, good colleges. And it's really, those who are working with students, I really appreciated the work and the relationship that you're building with your students. And Yomar, I was with graduation the beginning of the month, and it was amazing to see those students who were graduating for nursing program, and I was so proud of them. I was like, you guys made it, that's great, you know. And I realized the girls are working so hard than men. I don't know what's the problem, but one thing I really think is because we, in our culture, we put girls a lot of responsibility early age. But one thing in Somali culture, and I know this is true and I have seen it, is we teach men as a king. You know what I mean? We service them, which is not right, I think, in this put them a failure, not to be successful in this life. In America, both parents have to be working, children have to be contributing work. But if we teach a young man this differently, a woman, that is what I'm thinking would put them a failure, not being as successful in life, whether they're getting a job or getting a career that lead them a good, a sustainable life that pays good, you know. And it's really very important to those of you who are working like Omar organization to teach a young man responsibility early age and what's important for them. And another things could be parents are pressuring their children because parents want to keep the culture really and resist on it, but their children want to fit into the culture, American culture, and that's another problem. And the parent that does not have education, how can I balance to keep my child's culture, and how can I at the same time to communicate in a positive way? And if you have a language barrier and you don't have education of how to talk teenagers and communicate teenagers, that adds up. I am a mother myself. I have 5 kids. I have 3 teenagers, and it's a struggle. Even though I have the knowledge, I'm trying to, you know, sometimes and to be strong and stay with my words. At the same time, I have to be really trying to stay positive in order to get what I'm expecting to be done. But I have to realize it, what I can control and what they have a control. If we understand that one, it's a lot easier for them. It's better to keep it a tone, a positive, because if you get mad as a parent in typical immigrant culture, they want to stay the power and they want to be in control of everything. But if you have a teenager, well, teenager will show you what they can and what they cannot. So it's a challenge, language, teenager, you know, education. And immigrant parents, they wanted their child to be successful, and that's why they brought here. But I feel like a lot of parents are losing their children, and I believe we'd rather raise them in a poor countries to lose them in a gang, or you know what I mean, jails. And it's really hard, and it's hard to balance life. And we're trying to work so hard to help them. And I really appreciate those who are working with youth. I have been working with the youth for 15 years, whether I'm working with cultural or schools and stuff like that. And it is a challenge, but you need to understand them and get the same page with them. And it's hard work, but it takes a time, but it will work at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fatma. Anyone added something? Farah, you would like to say something? Since you are good. Okay, come here, me now. Okay, so.
Omar, if I could, so it's Brian here. Again, just to maybe pick up on some of the themes that Faduma just talked about, Mohammed, and the whole conversation really. As you know, you're one of our grant recipients, along with, although he's not a direct recipient, he's working in 21st century programs, and there's obviously an area here, or several areas rather, where we could connect, I hope, with some of the resources that would be available in the grant, you know, to supplement some of these areas. I mean, things, resources are always readily available in terms of, what's out there, actual physical resources, but it's as Mohammed said, is how we deliver those in a culturally relevant way. So we would have resources that are maybe in the district, for example, to help address some mental health issues or social emotional learning on, and maybe bridge some of those family engagement gaps, where, for example, could the parents teach the kids Somali if that's what they want to do and have that as a family engagement ongoing event within a program. So I'm looking at, I'm already kind of thinking of ways that we can help supplement what we're already doing with better things, or making it better to better address some of these issues. I think there's lots of conversations, I think, to be had outside of this meeting for sure. And lots of ways we can look at, how we in the district, as the schools that, most of the kids go to, can facilitate some of this, how we can facilitate something in our after school and grant programs. So, Omar's part of it. We have Abdi Robley and Mustafa Sharif as partners in our program. How can we help braid what we're trying to do in those areas with the funding and district and other resources to help bridge some of these gaps? Because that's what we're all about. All these things that you've presented, Mohammed, these are the areas that we need to try and address within the grant that we have, in the district. So how do we get the resources? How do we get them to the families? How do we get them in a culturally relevant and positive way? And then how can we address some of these achievement gap issues, which we know are prevalent? And, there are groups that are working on this, and I know Omar's part of them as well. So, Cradle to Career folk, Family Y, there are a ton of kind of possible collaborations that we can do to help underpin efforts in these areas. So I'm hoping this is the start of a conversation and something that we can look to address maybe over the course of, the next year, 18 months, 2 years, and so on, as we go through the life of this grant.
No, most definitely. And I think what you said actually hits it right on the head. I think we've been focused for a while on being culturally sensitive, but not really culturally competent. And that's where maybe we are kind of seeing the numbers really not improve. But I think the approach is that, it's not a community approach. I think we need an and approach. We need an academic and a community approach that is competent to the parents' need and really, makes kids want to come to school and not have to code switch and not have to feel like it's that they have these barriers in front of them if they want to ask for help, or just to say, hey, I'm struggling, because I think everybody struggles. The resources are there. It's just that we need to retool them a little bit, like you said. So I agree with you, Brian.
So my question then is, how do we follow up with this?
Well, go ahead.
Who do we need that now that well, I'm hoping a lot of people are now fully vaccinated. So how can we get in an actual room as opposed to a Zoom room, and maybe thrash out some actions, some plans, and maybe look at how we can fund some of these things going forward, because these are crucial issues right across the board.
Yeah, no, most definitely. I think Umar is leading us, so I think we'll kind of look to his leadership on this, and and we'll kind of hope to.
Umar has all my details.
Sounds good.
He knows where I am.
Brian, the great man.
Omar, if I can jump in here, it's also one thing that we always talk about the kids, about the students. I mean, how can we help them, and the achievement gap and all that, but we never talk about what can we do actually to support the family, the parents. One of the biggest problem is culture. We came from a culture where the parent role is not the same as the parent role that is defined here in the United States. I mean, back home, the parent role is to provide for the child, is provide food, clothing, shelter. Those are the priorities for those parents, whether it's a mom or dad. So for them, education, they rely on the teacher, they rely on the school. Then sometimes they actually rely on the neighborhood to actually help, that child. So what is missing here is that how can we really bring in the parent into the equation when it comes to helping their children? During the pandemic, during the COVID-19, we find out that yes, we were shipping the kids at home, but were they getting any help from their parents? That's the key. None of them were getting help from their parents because the parents were not actually inclined to get involved in the children's study. Well, except, you have those parents that are highly educated. So of course, those they will understand that, but the majority of them are not highly educated. And even they don't even know how to support their children in terms of helping them with homework or, who to, seek help or what they're supposed to do and things like that. So I think what we need to do is also talk about how can we help the parents get involved in the child education, not in the terms of, I'm not talking about, yes, prepare that child, put him his best clothes and give him the books and the tools that he needs to go to school, but also how can you discuss with that child, and help them.
Yeah, and if I could chime in on that as well, we were working actually with a community in East Grand Forks and in Faribault as well, where when the pandemic hit and e-learning kind of struck, all of us really, right, is that parents really had to make a choice of do I pay for a babysitter? How do I go to work? Because a lot of them, Mr. Ahmed mentioned, is that they don't really have kind of like the lucrative, six-figure paying jobs, right? They're blue collar workers. They're working in factories. Some of them are drivers, so on and so forth. And a lot of them really work the long hours, right? And I think we have this expectation as well as for the parents to be involved, but some of the parents don't even have the ability to be because they have to be at work or they have to be doing this and so on and so forth. And especially in America, usually both parents have to be working in order for them to be able to provide an equitable living to their kids. But at the same time, back at home, is usually, the man would be going to work and then the spouse would be taking care of the kids at home and so on and so forth. So the expectations are a lot more different here and a lot more difficult from an economic perspective. And then also, essentially, a lot of the parents are living near or literally at the poverty line. They have to work long hours. They're picking up extra shifts because they have to send money back home to Somalia. And then also there's this expectation of, I have to kind of navigate my kids through the experience of distance learning that occurred, and now we're going back to school and so on and so forth. But at the same time, what happened during this process is that they noticed that there's a gap between the kids and the educators in terms of communication, like Mr. Ahmed mentioned, as well as there's a gap in terms of some parents felt like their kids were not even being held accountable or being encouraged by the teachers that are teaching them. And it's just kind of like, oh, you're not doing well. And that's just kind of like the end of that conversation, right? So I think there's a lot of gaps that, a lot of bad things that COVID, brought, but a lot of things that COVID really, shed light on in terms of, how involved can we be, in our kids. And if parents, do not have the luxury because of their financial situation to be able to be involved, because, being involved in your kids' education honestly is a privilege, right? It's a privilege of having a good job. It's a privilege of having the ability to do so, right? But at the same time, I think we have to be able to look at the resources that exists. How do we bridge those gaps? And ultimately, how do we, shrink this achievement gap?
Thank you, Muhammad. Muhammad Adani, I see he raised his hand. Muhammad Adani.
Yeah, so this is a really great conversation. Thank you, my friend Mohammed Ibrahim. He presented really well. One thing I just want to add quickly without taking a lot of time is that I came literally 10 years ago in December, and I was a newcomer student. Like everything that he was saying, I was like, "Yep, I did this. I remember this. I came in as an 18-year-old with zero English and everything. So, and I learned very important lesson. When I look at the newcomer student in my class, there are two issues that I saw. So there's the barriers that we talked about, the language and everything, but there's also the barrier of education skills, how to learn, how to study, how to memorize, how to take exams and all that stuff. The reason why I was a little bit different situation, because even though I came in as a refugee, but I never felt as a refugee when I grew up in Saudi Arabia or in Jordan. I went to school all my life, and I went to school, and I elementary, middle, high school, transfer here as a high school. I came in, even though with zero English, I came in with how to study, how to memorize, how to take an exam. And my biology teacher was surprised that I got 100% on the exam because I just memorized everything and I put everything down. And he was surprised because I kind of had a skill where the other students, they have the English barrier and all this stuff that I was facing, but also how to study, how to take exams, all of that stuff. And this is a really important one because I sit down with one of the students, I told them, this is what I do this. And literally 2 days, like a couple months ago, he's doing a master's right now. And he said that if you did not sit down with me that day and tell me how to do this, and it's all about this planning, I would never be here today. And that kind of blew my mind because I realized maybe creating education training programs for the students, how to study, how to do all this is very important because we can't just rely on the parents. Typically, the students who have been here for a while, they develop these skills. They don't need help. Like the people who grew up here, like in high school, they don't need our help. They know they've been in elementary, middle, now they're in high school. They know how to do all this stuff. When someone comes in right away, they don't understand this stuff. So creating an education program or training program that speeds up the whole process where the students knows everything and how to do this kind of stuff, I think is very important. That kind of allows the students to be a little bit more independent from the parents and rely on himself to study, to memorize, and do all this stuff. I think this is a really great point. And I remember I went to UMR as well. I remember when I went to UMR, I told my English teacher, Dr. Wasik, I'm not good with English. English is my third language, and I'll probably memorize everything. I know how to study, how to take exam, all that stuff. And she said, don't worry about it. As long as you do, you'll be fine. So I think this is a really important point and something to be considered.
Thank you, Mohammed. Professor Ford, do you like to say something?
Well, I guess, I really appreciate the presentation, and I feel like from over the years, I kind of know some things secondhand, if you will. I mean, I teach world cultures and history, and certainly the history of Somalia, but it's always good to get a different perspective, and in particular a Somali perspective, right? I guess I thought I had was because Brian, I think it was Brian, what do we do? Where do we go? How do we, and there's all these issues. Ahmed brought up, there's the family. It's not just the student. I'm probably not saying anything new here, but I know some of us here are directors and leaders of these, respective organizations, or at least a part of one. I'm just a peon, myself at UMR, but I would hope that definitely, and with Omar's leadership too, that all these different local Rochester organizations can get together. And I mean, even, whatever, like UMR, I know I could finagle, having UMR being a place to host whatever, but I mean, that's more on the level of awareness, but that's important, I mean, to have kind of a gathering periodically that the local public comes to, but there's a buy-in from all of us, our local organizations, kind of strategizing how can we whether we're Somali or whether we're not, you know, how can we put our heads together to be more inclusive that Rochester alleges to be? And so, yeah, I know for my part, and I'm not the only one at UMR, but I definitely want to be available and a contact person for anything that would facilitate, you know, discussion and closing some gaps, how we can do that, education gaps or otherwise, in especially the greater Rochester area. I guess keep it humble, you know. Do
Thank you for anyone else to say something, question or comment? Because the time now 7:24, we have 5 minutes. Yeah, so
I would like to ask Muhammad Adani, would he like to lead a teacher a how to learn program? What's your availability, Mr. Adani?
I'll definitely help as much as I can. And my dad works at Rochester Public Schools as well. So
oh wow, okay.
Yeah,
Let's
so he's a bilingual translator.
Let's get around the table, Wilmar. Start the needle moving.
Muhammad Adan, he was a volunteer for our program, after school program, when he was the UMR student. He's a great man, and also he helped us all the time for the
Perfect.
So you can get anytime you need, Brian.
Yep, anytime.
All right, sounds good to me.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
yeah, let's have some kind of I'm just throwing this out, public gathering at UMR, and then bring in some of that Somali food that I was kind of
I promise you now,
savoring.
it is over, we can meet, you know, face to face, and yeah, we can prepare, you know, Somali food, you know, so it will be great. And also I would like to again and again UMR, you know, it can be helped us for last 5-6 years. So each semester they give us 60 students for the tutoring volunteers. So one of them, Muhammad, was with them. And that time he was preparing his bachelor degree. And thank you anytime. So we are.
Well, thank you, Omar. I mean, for bringing in food. I mean, definitely, I'm looking forward to that, and I can tell you, I will be available. Okay, if I'm still alive. So definitely. But this has been a good presentation. I mean, thank you, Mohammed, for really. I mean,
also, Mohammed,
enlightening us. Definitely, yeah.
Go up here. He's going middle school, high school here. You know, so he's our son. So
he's a great speaker.
Yeah.
Oh yes, I mean I can see that, so definitely. And actually, this is a plus if it's a local product. I mean, you know, from local schooling and all that. So yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. So we say thank you.
So you're right, Mr. Ahmad.
Okay, welcome from Mogadishu, Somalia. Are you sick?
First of all, Ahmed, you are right. This is a kind of local product. I'm very glad that we have like Muhammad Ibrahim for this very fantastic presentation. So as we are all I and Ahmed, we need to educate Muhammad and the young generation for the culture in order to fill out our gap. So that's the most important thing. And also we were talking about the education. The most important thing is we need to educate the parents. As my daughter was mentioning, first of all, if the parents are ignorant or they know nothing about how the system works, they cannot help their children. So first of all, we need to start helping the parents about how the school operates, how everything is working. So that's kind of the most important thing. So let's put the first focus on giving the most important, interesting to the parents. So when we build the parents, the children will be fine. So that's kind of one of the most important. As Ahmed mentioned it, at back home, parents have only very specific responsibility for taking care, for putting on the table for the food, going work and everything, shelter and everything. But based on the education, the community and the school were responsible for everything, for teaching the students. Because we are very collective culture. We have a collective culture which helps students to educate everyone. For example, if I saw a child doing something wrong in the street, I have tried to educate him and tell him everything. But here in America, it's not working that. you'll be in trouble if you do that. So first of all, let's put our most important and the priority to the parents. That's what I see, matter of fact. So thank you so much, Mohammed, again, my son. You did good job. And I appreciate how you did that one. It was very good.
Well, thank you, Mohammed. I want to add it also, Fana, one thing. When COVID-19 started, one issue that we find out was that, and especially this was after the schools were closed and the kids were doing the online classes. Well, the parents were not aware whether their kids were, in class or not, whether they were watching YouTube or whether they were actually attending classes, online. So we had to teach them. We had to, what we did is that we actually taught them how they can access the resources, how they can access the Skyward, how they can really, make sure that they know that their kids was attending these classes or not. Because let's not forget also, these kids were the same that were opening the mail for them, translating for their parents. They were actually in charge of that home. Before that. So yeah, there were a lot of things. The parents were facing a lot of barriers. So we had to really help them. And I think it's going to take the whole community to actually work with the parents. Fana is right.
Yeah.
We come from that culture where, we believe that it takes a village to raise a child. So I think we can do better. Definitely.
Finally, I would like to ask you, Fathiya, do you want to say something? Since you are grow up here too. Fathiya Mohammed?
Yes, can you hear me?
Go ahead.
It was a great presentation, Mohammed. I really enjoyed it. Growing up here, I did face all of those, I wouldn't say problems, but roadblocks when it came to learning how to take tests and then learning the language at the same time. I was fortunate enough to have a mother who really was strong about education, even though she's never been to school, but she would always make sure that we had our homework done, even though she couldn't read it. But she had my siblings, I have older siblings. She made sure that they checked all my homework, and she really, really stressed the importance of education. So, and a lot of our kids don't necessarily have that. And so this presentation, it was really good. It highlighted a lot of the issues that we still currently face. And I'm excited to possibly work with everybody and figuring out a solution to those obstacles.
Thank you.
That's great.
So I would like
Anybody available? I'm gonna say a short thing. Is that okay? Don't remember who was talking about the name. I totally, my screen is too small. I'm using my phone right now.
Okay.
But and one thing that somebody mentioned is like was I think I don't remember the name, but there is resources available for teaching a Somali language and culture. I think that is one thing I realized. Schools cannot cover everything for like a parent education. You know what I mean? One thing I know is our parents, they need really education about how their child will be successful, how to check emails, how to communicate with the teachers. Those little things, maybe can take a short time, but we need to put a time to provide that service. Like Omar, you're doing a great job, but there's a lot of other needs too. I know you're working with the students, but we need to work with the parents too. And one thing the school I work is like, I focus, how can we teach a class that teaches a history and culture? But we live in America, and the administration, they believe we need to cover everything that's public school is covering. But even covering 1/4 about the culture, especially those who are in charter schools who have opportunity, maybe you have a big number of Somali students. I really, if there is resources available for Somali culture or a professor or somebody who teaches, I think they need to advocate that and maybe communicate with the schools and what they can provide for it. Because if the child understands his culture, he will really respect the other peoples and what they do in life too. You know what I mean? But I think the kids who born here, they kind of lost, to be honest with you, and they're really very hardworking students. But when it comes to the culture and and planning and future success, they don't have that much, a lot of them, because their parents are not educated. So I would really like, and when somebody say, Adani, you want to teach a class? Adani, he's really amazing. He's an amazing teacher. He teaches us Arabic, and he's a really wonderful teacher. So if he adds Arabic and Somali, Adani, I really encourage you to do that.
Okay, thank you. And I would like to share with you guys, we used to have parity classes, and we invite every time to the public school and the police and other universities sometimes. We stopped since the coronavirus happened, but we are planning to start this summer. We used to use that time in the Register Area Foundation. It covered about 70 or 80 parents. Also now we can use any place we want. So I will share with you when we start that one. Soon in the summer, so we have to try to do 2 times a year or 3 times a year, whatever resources we get it. So me and my board, we decided, to start, this summer the first class. Hopefully, the end of July, we are planning to do that. So finally, that time we will share with you and Muhammad, and also public school, and also we will contact you that time. Again, I would like to thank you, anyone who here. I know you have a good time today. Everyone has a busy schedule, and you accepted, my invitation as a short. So now it is almost 7:40, and we can, wrap out now. Thank you.
Thank you, Umar, and thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed and Omar.
Thank you so much, guys. Take care. Bye.
This one I will put our website too.
Again, migrating and Mauritius from Mogadishu.
So thank you.
Take care. Bye.
The morning now, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's morning. We're ready to pray for morning prayers now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you, Warda. Thanks, Omar.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, man.
Yeah.
Son with that, I mean, Omar, I think it was a good presentation.
MashaAllah. Alice MashaAllah. It was good.
And we put our website, and inshallah, also we use our TV, local TV. So we can reach any Somali, our community,
Maya, Umar, waa u baahannahay regardless of adiga barnaamijyada sidaan waa ina annaga dhexdeena taa aan samaynaa barnaamijyo oo aan waalidiintana keeni karno hataa aanu ka wareysan karno maxay tahay baahida weyn ay qabaan maxay xisaabta mid aan ku darno October ilaa iyo January hadda soo socoto waxaad ogaataan familo badan ayaa la keenaa magaalada illa waa la furay mataqaana qaxootigii Soomaaliya waa laga qaaday mataqaana restrictionkii mataqaana waa laga qaaday hadda shirki aan ku jiro aniga isniinta qolada State Department-ga iyo mataqaana refugee resettlement-ga programka dadka sameynayo waxay ka wada hadleen in Soomaaliya iyo Congo ay yihiin kuwa ugu badan Afrika laga keeni doono iyo Ethiopian ta marka maqlayno Soomaaliya ku jirto ogtiin so marka waa in loo diyaar garoobaa familadaasito waa in mataqaana qaldaadkii hore u soo dhacay waa inaan ka faa'iideysanaa oo aanu sidee aanu carruurtan dambe hadda la keeni doono aan u saacidi karnaa so taasina waxay u banaanaysaa inaanu waalidiinta invite garayno la sheekaysano magarsamaan oo aan dhahno war maxay tahay waxa aan samayn karno now organization sidii saasa oo kale saasa waa inay develop garayn kartaa framework oo mataqaanaa dadkaasayto lagu saacidayo
Yeah, we will. We will.
Yeah, Bob.
We have resources now. Muhammad Adan with us now. Muhammad Ala with us now.
Inshallah.
Abdullah, we have young generation right now with ready to support us. So.
Muhammad Ala ما كودا مس محمد إبراهيم. Yeah.
ولا الكيس هو هذا شيء على ولا.
محمد إبراهيم.
محمد على ما ولا شيء ما على هذا الدقوة أنا قرب لا إله إلا الله. يقصير كلام الله.
ويلكي سوا
على يموت
على ميودا كجرتا
يموت
ما مغلو هايو
على ما ويل
على ويلكي سميا
ولا كسوا
على قرتي على
إيجار سوا
ها ويلكي سميا ما شاء الله
يا ربي
ما شاء الله
يا على
أحمد بي waxaan ku leeyahay maanadaada geeli gaartay
والله بالله horta waa u baahanaa ya laakiin iyaho nin waxaa jiro oo laakiin luuq English kulligeen Jeelani la yiraahdo adiga ma gaaraysid Jeelani
محمد لي وحالي عرفت بعيشها هذا كشبل من ذاك الاسد
haye carabiga isku fiicnin jilci
محمد عداني وفصل محمد عداني يا محمد عداني
tigi ninkaas
يا
aniga bonderan kiyo bonderan af carabi ma laga hadlo waqtaha
غير بقول الوحيد علي باي جورو
saas wala hadla markaas waa fahmayna muu qabiran ku siyaa markaas
حال انت كم مره waa جورو ولا مقتا علي باي جورو خير خير ان شاء الله لو دعاء لو دعاء انت لو دعاء ان شاء الله
ما وادعوا يا ويلك ان شاء الله
ما شاء الله ما شاء الله دعوة ما شاء الله
إله
الله يفتح له الله يفتح له ان شاء الله
وبساس
اللهم امين اللهم امين اللهم امين
سنه بدا هذا هاي فنحوا الله كنا بدي يلا دقنا ماشي هذا
ان شاء الله واسمعوا دول كثير حمر بجاج بجاج
فلح عودي 911
ما يا فنحوا بوندري وسلام بوندري وسلام بوندري بوندري اللي باح وسلام
السلام عليكم
ما كان هي السلام عليكم